So welcome back, everyone. Very nice to have everyone back. I hope everyone's had their coffee and they're full. She mentioned aptly called shifting the gaze. I think we have been working a lot on how do we communicate systems and ecosystems and complexities better. And this was an outcome of that exercise where when we stop looking at our original gaze and when we shift it, then how does our vision sort of become broader and larger, and how are we able to plan and account more for failures much better, given that when you shift the gaze, your understanding is enhanced in many ways. The previous session this morning, I think they've been absolutely brilliant. Everyone would agree. I learned a lot. I rethought a lot of our own programs and projects, I think, just in the morning 2 sessions. So thank you so much for that. We did want to start this off by our own failures, but SELCO has had many failures over the years. Some of them are very well documented, some of them not so much. I did have a couple of slides, but in the interest of time, we're just going to focus on the panelists and the stories. But we failed miserably on a clean cooking program and that was personally, I was involved in it, I drove it, followed all the participatory design, the processes, and it still didn't work out. I think most of them today are being used, they're rusted, they're used as umbrella stands and shoe stands and whatnot. Another program that we failed in is Light for Education, where we actually supported a lot of schools to have lights and children to carry pocket-sized batteries. And we learned a lot on ownership in public systems and accounting for operations and maintenance there, and how critical and the transaction cost of actually doing that. And the third is solar water pumps. I know that a lot of us working here have, solar water pumps. We've implemented so many in the past, and very often what ends up happening when you don't consider the soil, water, and the farmer is this will end up getting unused or underutilized one way or the other, because the water tables decrease further, and you've not really considered what happens 5 years, 10 years down the line, right? So here a lot of our learnings is how do you look at, solutions and program designs more holistically, bringing in the appropriate partnerships to account for or reduce the possibility and the level of failure that you could have, I guess. But as was said in the previous session, failure is inevitable. We cannot not fail. So with that, and coming into this session, I wanted to pass the mic on. And just to give a little context on the panel, the wonderful panel that we have here with the knowledge that they bring, we sort of have 3 different types of stakeholders here, right? So Gauri ji, when she takes a decision and gets into a program and signs a document, it's literally a lot of lives at stake, livelihoods at stake, and it's huge decision making, right? So when you're in that position, like how much do you think about, will it fail? What will I do if it fails? Does it fail? You have Jay really representing CSTEP, but also representing, I think, researchers, academicians, and scientists, and what they bring to the table in terms of evidence building. And the recommendations that Jay gives Gauri ji, how much of responsibility does the policy, do the researchers have on the kind of studies and research pieces that they take up, right? And you have Stephanie, who's really been supporting, every time I say last mile, she corrects me and says first mile. So you have Stephanie, who every time that she's been supporting first mile solutions, entrepreneurs, mostly on the decentralized renewable energy side. So we'll be hearing from all of these 3 perspectives, and hopefully all 3 will be weaving in and bringing in the end use perspective as well. So with that, Gauri ji, over to you for your experiences.
So first of all, thank you for having me here, because it's a clear recognition that I have a good failure pedigree. I was here in 2018 and I'm here again, so that's established. What I want to talk about is how working with communities over the years has really changed the way I think about implementation, and how I really failed to get that thinking across for so many reasons with many of my colleagues. And I think that's really, to me, a real personal failure. So I'd really be talking about that, but maybe position it in the context also of the decentralized renewable energy solutions, which, I think we speak about it a lot, but when you get into implementation, it doesn't really get us to the scale that we require to reach. So in Madhya Pradesh, I was looking after this program which we designed for poverty alleviation, working with communities. And every time I went into the field to talk to communities, I'd come back, feeling, oh my God, I know nothing really about how things happen and how decisions need to be made, or what communities are thinking. I'll just give you some examples. I went to this village where there's a group of women who are doing goatry, and I asked them, okay, these goats look different. They don't look the kind that you normally see. And they looked at me and they said, you know what? Whatever project we had given them money upfront in their banks, and they said, you know what? We went 600 kilometers, went by train. We'd never traveled by train. Went to this place called Magdoom in UP. We knew that the goats there were very good. We brought these Jamna Pari, and we know how to look after them. So, don't come and tell us why you're not doing these local goats, or why you're not doing, these kind of things. So we know what we have to do, okay? Then there's this village in Rajgarh, close to Rajasthan, and we were very happily greeted by this whole band group, and very nice instruments, very, very posh instruments. And I was wondering how they managed to get it, and how did the procurement work. And they said, we went to Meerut, and we put our money in our, so they have this hidden pocket. And they said, we hid it there, went by bus in a huddle, and went and brought the best instruments back. And this is what we have. So community procurement, tells you a couple of things about how we think they should be doing their business, but they can tell you much more. And the third, which is a very important example, because I'll move to renewables now, is that there was a stop dam, a large stop dam that got built by the community. And when you ask them how did they actually get the engineering stuff done, they said, what do you guys think? Who do you people hire as mates? Our people. These are the guys your engineers hire as mates. They don't come every day. They come, once in a while, but it's these guys who do it. So we just asked this boy, who's been a mate to many of these structures from, the close by village, to come and guide us. And this is what we produced. So what I'm saying is that things that we think are rocket science, or, so complex, so difficult, we need to go and talk to communities to get a sense back about what the reality really is. So, after this whole experience and all the learning, I land up in a ministry which is probably one of the first ministries in the world dedicated to renewable energy, scientist ministry. I really didn't know what a scientific ministry is till I landed up there. And then I realized, oh my God, this is like a huge empire, and these are gods of small schemes. Everyone was a god. Everyone was running these tiny, tiny schemes, bifurcated by, I think I counted something like 40. So one person is doing just a scheme on a particular type of biogas, spending, like 50 million or something in a year in terms of budget. Someone's doing commercial biogas and, just focusing on that. And then creating this whole structure of a monopoly of being able to say that unless, we direct it to the state entities who are similarly, structured, only then it can go to the end user, because these are scientific things that we are doing. I'm not trying to disparage the whole science behind it, but it's just not rocket science. So you had these schemes, multiple schemes, which are all about there was a benchmark cost, and then there was a capital subsidy that was being allocated. But the whole system of managing to get that capital cost was so complex that you might as well not have, even put it there, because no one was going to access it anyway. So I thought, this is my chance. Let me try and get this whole thing about community procurement, because what's like a biogas and even a solar panel, if you just go into some of the areas in villages in Bihar, you'll probably see them being sold like vegetables. So, really no great rocket science. But, I thought, okay, maybe, you can't do straight from the government of India, you can't straight go into community procurement, but maybe, let's at least democratize it, finish that monopoly that the state entities have, and get in many more players to do it. In solar, we could do it because, solar, luckily, there was a very strong mandate, political mandate, so, you could just push it through. So you had these channel partners who acted like aggregators to take it forward. But you still, I have to say that even despite knowing that, this is really not the way forward, we still have, and it's not just a case of renewable energy, but we still have this whole sense that we have to over-design because the people that we are designing it for are dumb, which is not the case. And then what we end up also doing is to basically say, because I'm the one who understands everything, the people who are the users understand nothing, you over-design and over-design. And instead of having one simple objective, we have so many multiple objectives that we are trying to fulfill that at the end we end up fulfilling nothing. So if schemes, and I hope there's no one sitting from MNRE, if schemes have not moved, it's really, the implementation is the whole problem, because I think the intent is good, obviously you want it to work, but it's also about not picking up the signals and not, as Mr. Surya Kumar said, having your ear to the ground. And at the end, I think it's also about the culture. The culture from which I come from is a culture of my baap. And that you've done, you've got into government, so now you can't be questioned because whatever you're thinking is really the best way forward, and the people in front are your beneficiaries. So that whole sense is what gives us this multiple failures that we've seen in government schemes, because we're not talking as partners into doing our work, but as people who we are talking to are beneficiaries of a particular thing. So let me just stop here.
Thank you so much, Gauri-ji. I think everyone now knows what my baap means. But moving from large-scale ministry level DRE programs, subsidies, and some of the learnings there, Jay, I want to just move over to you. If you can give us a sense and focus on the rooftop solar bit that we were talking about. Thank you.
Thanks, Huda. I think I would rather stand because I need to see the slides as they come along. So as he's bringing up the slides, I'll just say one thing, that when I got the invitation, I was honored. At the same time, I was like, oh my God, everyone knows my failure. And then I thought that I can't say no to Harish because I didn't want to reveal to him how we are failing, because what my biggest worry is, Harish would tell me that, Hari, I would have told you this long ago, right? And I think most of the SELCO people are laughing, and we know why. So this is something that, let's start with the fact that, we can go, I can go to the next slide. Oops, sorry. Yeah, so we know these numbers, right? That there's a huge renewable energy commitment. there's this announcement that we have achieved the, solar mission for 100 gigawatts by 2022. We were supposed to achieve it, and they're saying we are achieving it. But we were thinking much longer term, and we were saying that, and this was around the time when we realized that this large solar parks are not the answer, simply because they add various kinds of externalities to this system. One is the load on the grid, the land availability, and then we also realized that distributed renewable energy was the way to go. But then as we were looking at it, the rooftop PV was not taking off. And there was a bit of a think here that what do we need to do to enhance the rooftop PV adoption, right? So I think there was some announcement just yesterday which talked about this last year there was a 1.2 gigawatts increase in rooftop PV across the entire country in the year, this calendar year. But we'll need to look at that. So, so land availability was a concern. We were also worried, and there was a scheme in Karnataka that told agriculturals that you can use your agricultural land for rooftop PV, and we were saying, okay, we are back to a food versus fuel debate. There was, of course, ecological issues, but when we defined it, so let's start with how we as an academic sort of, I would say pseudo-academic institution, we think very academically, we think problems and we try to identify it, but we are also engineers, so we also think of various ways in which we will fail. So failure is part of our DNA, to think about failure as we start off, but then of course, as Huda said it very rightly, we cannot not fail, right? We will find some other failure, let's figure out what that was. So when we defined the RTV problem, we realized there was one thing when we talked to people was that there was uncertainty in the payback that people were looking at. Now, there are people who will put a rooftop PV system irrespective of the payback, the financial payback. But then there's a large swath of people that will say, when am I going to get my money back? What is the payback looking like? And if it is more than 8 to 10 years, typically people will say, "Nahi yaar, not now, I will think about it later." So, and we saw the big uncertainty actually coming from people saying that, next door I have this building, the shadow falls on my roof, how much power will I generate, things like that. And so also the question was, I have enough space for a 10 kilowatt system, but should I put only 2, should I put 3? So that was the second question. And then of course, there's always a policy uncertainty, though we knew will always be there. That is whether net metering, gross metering, what is allowed, what is not allowed. And so there was a bit of lack of clarity. So at that point in time, we defined our problem. And I think this is something where I think that's our first failure, is that we define the problem the way we like to solve the problem, right? Don't tell us to do things that are real, but tell us to do things that we can do. And so that's how we defined the problem. We said, let us think that RTPV will happen if the scale of operations is great, costs will come down, things will happen. So that is number one. Second is, if I can accurately estimate what your roof, you as an individual homeowner, how much potential you have, and do some sort of a verifiable techno-economic analysis saying that if you put these panels in these places, you will generate so much energy, given your consumption, this is how much you will make in your payback period. I think it's a fairly simple business case that you teach at any business school. And then we would then approach the discoms and assist them in creating this single window and do that, engage with citizens, make sure they all come and do that. So this was the way we thought about it. This technical solution, we said that if we have to do it at scale, we cannot sit and map house by house. It has to be done in one big swath. It has to be done very quickly because our urban areas are also changing. It needs to be done quickly and updated, of course. So we said we will do an aerial survey of large urban spaces, use high resolution imagery. So now this is where the academic side of us come. There was a paper in 2009, 2010 that said this can be done. Has anyone done it? No. So that's where our innovation comes in. We'll say we will do this. And we'll produce all this. So all the rest all is all part of it, that we will create that. So what are the mapping technologies? There's satellite. It's very low cost, but unfortunately the resolution is too coarse, right? It's more than 30 centimeters. There was aerial photogrammetry, and at that time there was no drone policy. So we were not sure whether that would actually run. So what did we do instead? We mounted a lidar on a helicopter and flew it around Bangalore. And this just gives you a schematic of what was done. We flew it all around Bangalore, mapped every roof. We were able to get a lot of data. And this is what it looks like. I think let's just go through this. So this is just when you map it out, this is what it looks like. These look like houses, but they're actually what is called a point cloud. Each point at about a 5 centimeter resolution is being mapped. And what you do is you then stitch it all together, and you know the solar insolence, so you know how much sun is falling on every roof every hour of the day. Let me just go back a bit. And you connect all these point clouds and you can get a surface and you roughly know which building lies where, and as the sun moves 8760 hours, you know how the shadow from one building will fall on the other. And that was the essence of this particular exercise. And believe me, we thought we would fail on 2 counts here. The first failure we thought would be nobody will give us the money to do this. Luckily or unluckily for us, somebody came and said, this is a great idea, why don't you try it? And then we realized when we did the calculation that this is peanuts compared to what the potential was. And I mean, we are looking at almost, Bangalore has a potential of 2 gigawatts of rooftop potential. And even if we achieve 1/4 of that, the cost of flying would completely be met. And the second failure we thought was that we will not be given permissions to fly. Luckily, that was also solved. So as you know, suddenly we thought, boy, the 2 big problems we thought, we are done. We have made it, and little for us to know. So this is just to give you, many of you are aware of this building. All from Bangalore would probably know which building this is. And, we ran it for a whole bunch of buildings that we know are familiar. For those who are from Bangalore, you can still go onto a website called crest.cstep.in, and you can check for your own house if you have your RR number. So it's still running. And this is just to show you. And then we showed that for this particular building, which is Chaudhaya Memorial Hall, the place where music concerts are held, the payback period was within 3 years if you put rooftop panel, right? So we thought every house, people should be looking at this, and within no time, Bangalore is from IT city to solar city, right? So this is where we are today, sadly. And this is the failure I would want to talk about, is that with 1.4 gigawatt potential that we feel is easily doable, with fairly good rates of return, we expected about 1 gigawatt of installations, and the current installation is only 30 megawatts. And a lot of it has happened in the past. It's not, in the recent past, it's very low. So what is really happening here? And I think this is where I would like to, this is just a failure. And I think the piece that I would want to talk about is that the one biggest place that we have identified, and this is where we are still trying to do the post-mortem of this, is that we realize that the DISCOM is not the entity we go to at the end of all of this. It is someone that we have to actually engage right from the beginning because of the powers they hold as far as the distribution sector is concerned. And we have to work with them on 2 things. The first concern they have is that if you put rooftop PV, who is going to be the first entities that will take up rooftop PV are the people who are paying the most amount for their power. And that would mean their customers, the best customers are going to be going away. And so there is no incentive for them to do that. So the solution that we have found for that, and that's something that we are working on now, is that we are coming up with a set of people that we can combine commercial as well as individual households, which when combined together, you will be able to make sure that the average cost of power for the DISCOM remains the same. It doesn't get worse, it doesn't increase. And that is one way in which we have to assure them that this is going to happen. The second thing that is a little bit more technical is that if everybody in a particular street decides to put rooftop PV panel and they're connected to the same distribution transformer, then you will also have a problem. And that's where a technical analysis needs to be done. Unfortunately, our discoms, and this is nothing to do with Bangalore, across the country do not know where your house is. If you tell them this is my RR number, they will have to call the lineman to saying, where is this house? And I think that is a big problem. And that is something that we are working on. So just to give you a sense of how we going forward from this failure is, one is working with the discom to develop what we call as a data room, where they can identify the roofs that need to be solar panelized or get solar panels onto them, so that two things don't happen. The technical considerations of the distribution transformers and costs don't go up, and the average cost of acquiring or buying power also doesn't go up. So these are the two areas I will say. So happy to hear more questions from people. Thank you.
Thank you, thanks a lot, Chair. So I'll go into questions right after this. Stephanie, over to you, if we can get your opening thoughts, and then we'll go into questions.
Thanks so much, Huda. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for welcoming me here. It's great to be here. I think I'm falling forward because last time I was invited just as a guest, and now I'm up on stage. So we'll see which way I continue to fall. So Good Energies is a small family foundation based in Europe, and I run our clean energy program, as Huda mentioned, focused on energy access, primarily small-scale renewables for communities that are underserved by the current systems. So I want to talk about 3 failures that I've seen and been part of, because as a grant maker, when my grantees' work fails, then that's a failure within my program. So it might not be my fault. I hope it's not, but it's still my responsibility. So, and I think in some cases I have played a role. So sometimes we talk, there was a comment at the last session, we were talking about failures and then solutions right away. Well, we want to talk about failures so we can learn something from them and have that growth mindset. So the first off is in the framing of what we're even talking about. So we're talking about the future of energy systems here. So we're letting energy lead, right? So when we lead with energy, we end up with a solution like electricity connections. Every household in this country was deemed connected, right? Full electrification. My trustees come to me and say, so we don't need to work in India anymore, right? That might win you elections, but it doesn't solve the problems for the households that don't actually have electricity. So you can have electricity connections. Well, maybe then you have connections with no electrons, but then there's no way to use the electrons if you do have the electrons. Okay, you've got the electrons, but maybe not all the time, and who knows how much it costs. Or maybe it's reliable and it's affordable and it's renewable, but only for 3 years, because that's when the O&M contract runs out for the developer and they pull out, and then we have another system that is rusting away. So how can we shift the gaze from leading with energy to, as Rohini sort of prompted us to, thinking about an energy-enabled system rather than an energy-led system? So if we change that perspective, we're going to start with the user. What do we want from the energy? Because it's not about the electrons, right? It's what you can do with it. And if we start from that place, you ask a very different question than what is the future energy system? Instead, we should ask, what is the future, what does the farmer's future life look like? Right? A very different question. What does the future patient experience look like in a healthcare setting? So just switching that frame a little bit. The second failure that I've seen, and it's related to the first, is if we're going to start with the user, automatically we're going to pay attention to more than just the electricity technology. So Jay had a good example of sort of leading with a research project. This is going to lead to a perfect outcome. So we've seen people with their specialty leading with what they know and expecting that to come up with an outcome. I have a hammer, everything is a nail, right? I know data, this is going to lead to perfect policy decision. I have a perfect policy, this is going to lead to perfect implementation. Or I'm a perfect community organizer, this is going to be the solution. But of course, we need that ecosystem approach. Okay, I'm getting to the failure here. Even when we take an ecosystem approach, we find it's very rare that one organization does all of those things well, let alone one individual, right? So in the decade that I've been doing this now, we've tried to push our partners to think more with this ecosystem approach. But if one organization can't do it, are there things that we as a funder can do to encourage collaboration between different organizations? We know we're part of that problem there when we make organizations and NGOs compete for limited funding, or compete with each other for limited funding, whether they're enterprises or NGOs. How can we change our processes to do less of that? And even when we encourage collaboration, it doesn't always work. Okay, so some of you might recognize yourselves in this story. I won't name names. But a few years ago, a number of us, including myself, but mostly folks here in India, sort of hatched an idea for a campaign to change the narrative around energy access, right? There was this dichotomy between on-grid and off-grid electricity, and one was better than the others, and within the energy access field, we spent a lot of time arguing about, the solution is mini-grids, or the solution is lanterns, or the solution is rooftop, or CNI is gonna bring the market along, right? And we realized that actually this larger dichotomy, sort of false dichotomy of on-grid, off-grid, was not helpful. So, was there a way we could have an organized communications campaign of 5 or 6 different organizations, each bringing their specialty to the table? We provided seed funding, some other funders provided seed funding. There were going to be MOUs, and it was going to be very sort of mapped out, and it was going to be great. Well, it never went anywhere. The 2 or 3 organizations managed to raise funding. Some of the others didn't. It was actually a very sensitive topic to have organizations with foreign funding telling the Indian government how they should think about their energy planning. And maybe some of the organizations involved didn't have the trust of the other organizations. So it never actually led to any kind of campaign. But now we're 5 years later, and actually the narrative of energy access in India is completely different from where it was 8 years ago when I first visited India. There is a recognition that a lot of different solutions are needed based on the local context. For people with no electricity connections, the near-term solution might be lanterns. Hopefully they can graduate to a larger solution. The people with unreliable electricity from the grid might need a backup system or an inverter. So there's now this recognition of the need. And I think a lot of the conversations that we had in planning that campaign that never happened, people actually internalized some of the discussions. So the technical people brought their messaging, the folks that work on campaigns and movements brought their ideas to the table. So just in that planning of the campaign that never happened, we all learned a lot that we could take back into our work, even as we worked independently. Okay, very briefly so we can get on to discussion. The third failure I just want to mention is a failure of expectations. I think working with a lot of entrepreneurs in the energy access field, I've come to sort of take everything I hear, kind of like planning a house renovation or building a house. It's going to take twice as long and it's going to cost you twice as much. And every entrepreneur is incredibly optimistic about how much they can achieve and how quickly they can achieve it. And it's not my job to kill that optimism, but it's my responsibility within my program planning to recognize that this is actually going to take longer and build for that. And then, where possible, advise them to plan for the things that are unknown that are likely to make it take longer and therefore cost a little bit more. So managing our expectations that there are going to be complications along the way and that it will take longer and likely cost more. So those are 3 quick categories of failures.
That's great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. So So from the multiple, I think, learnings from these failures within successes and successes within failures, but there's just maybe one question that I'll ask each and then open it out, and if we have time, maybe try and gather a couple of audience questions itself. But Gauriji, you mentioned the need to demystify clean energy systems, and it's come a long way and it's matured a lot. And you kept saying specifically, avoiding over-design. Is it possible for you to give us some example of either an over-designed program which we learned from and then moved to a more simpler, basic, something that's running well, and how do you, and I mean, the title of the session is Future of Clean Energy Systems, so the idea is how do we move towards a less complicated, but at the same time effectively designed clean energy programs.
All right, so Huda, all supply-driven programs are heading to failure because you really don't look at what the end users really want. So I'll give you an example. There are a lot of the primary health centers and district hospitals in Madhya Pradesh, for example, had experts come in who didn't talk to the people and the technicians and the physicians and whoever were the stakeholders of that particular ecosystem, and went ahead, put these solar panels on top, took out a room and filled it with battery, and they said, okay, this is now done. Now, at some field visit, when I went and visited, I said, okay, so you have this nice solar panel on your roof which gives you reliable electricity, and they said, but we never use it. And why don't you use it? So they said, we had a nice roof. These guys came and drilled these holes. Now we have leaky roofs. So a lot of our infrastructure for health we can't use because one room they've put batteries in. Then we had this really good place where we would have patient consultations. We can't use it because the roof is now leaking. And anyway, none of us know how to do it. You have to call, if something goes wrong, you have to call someone from God knows where, and the guy never turns up. So, we're probably worse off than where we were. As compared to turning it on its head and saying, and I think that's the key, that this is not rocket science. It's ultimately the people who need to use it understand what their needs are, and they can find an expert to actually put in what they want, but the expert has to be someone who listens to them. So I think, again, it probably goes down to who procures the system and for what end. If it's a government entity that's doing large procurement and trying to run a supply-driven program, you're bound to fail. As against, putting it in the hands of the stakeholders who really know their needs and they want to use it and they want to make sure that it improves their working condition, and you design a program around it, then it succeeds. And there are many, many, many examples of this nature.
Thank you so much, Gauriji. Jay, coming to you, I caught on to this one thing that you said where, academics and researchers, you redefined the problem according to what was tackleable so that you could avoid failure at any cost. So if you can expand on that a little bit, and learning from that, what are you doing differently?
Yes, I think it's got to do with the fact that, the academic ecosystem is all about constantly showing that you're doing great and you're always succeeding. I think we all have been part of that, and it's particularly pathological in the academic system. If you've not, I know there's some professors here and they will look at me really badly in this, but this notion of if you're not publishing that one paper every year, why are you even here, right? Maybe at IMB it's 5 papers a year, and why are you even here? And I think we do not take on, and I mean, this is my past life as an academic, is we never take on a project for which I know that I will be able to publish this paper by the end of the year. Otherwise, I'm out of there. So what do? We redefine the projects we take. So it's a very risk-averse approach. Now, I think sitting where we are as CSTEP, I think that's a rethink that we've had in the last couple of years, is that I think we should get out of that mindset that we need to have this very risk-averse approach. Let's go about taking risk-taking, because what do we have to lose? There's not much to lose there. Yes, maybe a few funders will tell us that, you guys failed. But given the funders I'm seeing here all accepting failure, I think maybe it's okay. So thanks, Harish, for educating me on that. But I think one of the things that we are doing is actually now, one is, of course, taking on a little more risk, saying that, okay, let's fail, it's okay. But also identifying the ecosystem approach, I think, that we are talking about now. How do we define that ecosystem so that we identify more people who will be part of the solution, rather than the academic way was always me versus them, or me versus the other person, and we are constantly competing. Oh, he put out 4 papers, oh, I have to put out 5 papers. That kind of thing, to saying that, if we have to get somewhere, we have to do it together. How do we find the right sets of people that will help mitigate those risks that I do not know? I mean, I think Rohini's talked about, right? Unknown unknowns, or those kinds of things. How do we mitigate those kinds of risks by getting different players, and then also accept that we might still fail? I think that is the other part. And so I think that ecosystem approach, taking on more people that we would normally not take on as partners in the work that we are doing. And I think that's the sort of the approach that we have. So now we are actually now changing our metric of success and impact. And we are trying to say that unless we scale what we are doing, we will not call it a success. It's still work in progress. And that is the approach we are taking.
If I can comment on that.
Please.
So Jay and I were talking yesterday, and that not talking about failure reminded me from academia of researchers who don't publish the negative results. So you test a new drug or something, and if there's no significant effect of that drug, it doesn't get published. But that's actually really important to know. And in our sector, it's also really important to know the things that don't work. And otherwise, we'll just keep repeating what each other's doing. So there's lessons to be learned also. I mean, it's not fixed in academia, but we need to fix it here as well. So we should publish case studies of what hasn't worked, so that we can stop repeating those same approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I understand it, you then shifted the success metric from getting a successful research done to actually getting adoption and scale from a research perspective. Stephanie, you also mentioned about curbing competition. You said, people were vying for a certain fund and, moving to collaboration. And I think in the last day and this morning, there was a lot of really strong points around collaboration, right? And somebody made a comment in the previous session, I think, saying that, let's plan and assume that collaboration won't happen, and then how do you do that, rather than being, okay, it needs to happen, should happen, certain cases it won't happen. If you can talk a little bit, maybe with an example or not, but how do you do that better? Like, how have you tried to curb competition, push collaboration, or accept that collaboration doesn't happen, and a little bit on that?
Yeah, so I think continuing to fund an organization even when their first project fails, if we had good learnings. I think in collaboration, continuing to, so that helps then with this. So if we have an organization or organizations that are working together, and one of the partners in a collaboration, the thing that they bring to that collaboration fails to really add something, we don't just automatically cut our funding to that organization. We make sure we learn, and we try to, if we're going to exit from a collaboration, make sure we're being responsible in that and not leaving an organization in the lurch. Taking a multi-year approach and having agreement with the different players, so maybe there's 3 or 4 NGOs all working together on something, agreeing not so much on the activities or the specific in the jargon of philanthropy, the deliverables or the reports or things. But what common goal are we trying to achieve that everybody is working together? And then leaving a lot of flexibility for the different players to figure out how they're going to contribute to that. And let it change along the way. That's really important. So making sure that my colleagues in our measurement and evaluation understand that what we're interested in is that ultimate change, and not whether they carried out all of the studies they were going to carry out, or published the reports they were going to publish, or made so many connections. But have we achieved that end? So building that into our systems.
You know what Jay said is so interesting. I happened to look at the Indian Council of Agriculture Research, ICR, which is like the big body of working on agriculture research in India. And if you go through their objectives, they haven't mentioned the word farmer anywhere. It's so strange. So, and the whole incentive structure is for publishing papers. So they sit in these really fancy, large research complexes spread out over so many, hectares. And all that the scientists are really doing for getting promoted to the next level is doing research papers without any sense that whether that research paper is going to lead to any development on the ground in terms of productivity, because farmers don't even exist in the, and they've got their objectives almost like I think it's a copy and paste job of the Bhabha, the atomic energy department, and all of them have these cutting edge research and blah, blah, blah. Nothing about how that research is going to help the person on the ground.
Thank you so much. So I have gone through the questions. I'm just going to ask one question because we're short of time, but I feel it's...
I have one request. Can I ask one question, please, from audience?
Sure. Yeah.
And particularly to Dr. Jai and...
we'll take two, one and then you one.
Okay. Yeah, particularly to Dr. Jai and also to brought back a lot of old memories around research and publishing papers. Particularly being asked, what are you doing if you're not writing papers? So how do you think the whole academia, where we were being taught about all these successes, how you would success in about everything, starting from your basic studies or how do you walk and everything, how do you slowly change that narrative to, okay, this is how it need not have to be done, this is how it should be done, and how do you think in this scenario, you would sort of try to communicate and convince people that, failures and knowing how the failures happened would also be important way for learning.
We'll just collect a few questions and then come back. So you had a question.
Because they are wonderful presentations. Clean energy is a necessity. Now, there are great challenges and opportunities, and they have already said you have to be careful, there are hiccups. That's clear. Now, the thing is, we should all overcome the hiccups and start to make it implement. As I said, it's not publishing papers. I was in IIT Delhi for 40 years. I know, I have been in academics, I know the whole game of things. Now, already one of this summary is we should go decentralized, off-grid. And it is possible because it is a dream that through grid we can supply electricity to every village in India. Today, villages, there are wires drawn to the village, but those wires don't carry current most of the time. Therefore, decentralized off-grid or microgrid mission must be a national mission. And it is doable, it is not rocket science. And we have the technology. Every village has solar and bio, every village. And there are a few with wind, small hydro, storage, and all the things. And it is doable and feasible. So the thing, we need to have an action plan. Number one. Number two is, as Jay said, one gigawatt of potential in Bangalore, 30 megawatts available, only 3% is available. That means the gap is huge. Technology is available. Now, I think we also have to identify there is one problem in this: vested interests, lobby, mafia, whatever you may call. Ethics is a critical issue. In all the things. And I think this session has been very educative, and it should lead to actions. That's all.
Thank you so much. No, I think just given in the interest of time. Yes. 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 Sure, absolutely. So I'll address that at the end. No, I did see that, but I think the conversation, okay, fine. Since it's really, okay, so this is a question that has, yes, go ahead, why don't you?
There is an allegation on the clean energy sector that it has a tendency to hide failures because of certain donors as well as investors' vested interest in promoting certain technologies. And it continues year after year despite no evidence of success of certain technologies. For example, microgrids. Economic success, business success is not yet visible, but we continue to pump millions of dollars behind such technology. It has happened in clean cooking, it has happened in biogas. Microgrid is the latest example of that, right? So are we saying that we will stop pursuing the basic business economics, which ultimately the people of this country want to consume and accept as a choice rather than something forced to them, right? And do we have that ivory tower position here, forcing solutions to people, even without proving that these are solutions?
May I?
Yes, Stephanie, go ahead. But I'm just going to move to final comments, just in the interest of time. But Stephanie, on specifically what Manoj was asking in microgrids, and then Jay, final comments with the research to action, and then Gauri ji with what end comments and reflections on what Sir was saying on action, and yeah.
I hear you. So I'm not going to comment on certain funders hiding negative results. It's definitely a problem. But I bring this back to one of the things I see, which is a failure in expectations. So we expect microgrids to be profitable when every other instance of electrification around the world has been subsidized. It was subsidized in the United States, it was subsidized across Europe. Why do we think that electrification in rural India can survive without subsidization? So asking every microgrid to be profitable in and of itself is the other problem, is even the programs often support individual microgrids rather than the portfolio of microgrids that a company might have. Because microgrids often might reach profitability after 4 years when there are enough appliances on board, but not in that initial stage. So you need to take that portfolio approach. But it comes back, I think, to expectations. But being more honest about what's not working, I think, is really important, because then donor or investors will also manage their expectations of what reasonable returns are.
So I'll kind of combine the question that also came was on this idea of, I think this is a society problem. It's not something that we can solve. I'm not here to tell the academic not to do papers. That's their job. That's what they have to do. I think the onus is on us who are outside of academia, though we are adjacent to them, to not take on their burdens on us. I think we should be thinking differently and in our own way and think of our metrics. And I think one of the metrics that we have started moving towards is this impact metric. And if we fail, so be it. I don't think, I'm also very clear that any person who is pedantic about the numbers will fail, because then you get only into the numbers and you have all kinds of bad behaviors. I think we should be very honest about that. And I think that's what, I think we have to start getting to an honest approach. That is, tell people that that is not the only way to judge, or that's not the only way to measure success. I think one person's success could be another person's failure, maybe. We don't know. So I think that's that.
I think it's also a mindset issue. The mindset issue being that who are the people who are managing our grids right now? They're people who for them 49 hertz is like it's like something that they can't shift from, and these are everyone who's actually who've learned about centralized systems. For them to now make the shift, so more than anything else, and I agree technology is there, I agree that there's also a way of looking at the schemes that have worked or not worked and get into implementation issues. But I think it's the mindset shift that we require to think differently, to think about solutions that are much more demand-driven and much more doable in the context of India, and not just try and look at something that's done very well. A rooftop, for me, I mean, I have my views about it, but it might have done extremely well in Germany, but it's not doing well here. So, what we need to do is to go back to the drawing book and really think, is this the way forward? Maybe it's not.
Thank you so much to all the panelists, and please feel free to approach them during lunch to actually get some of the questions not asked. I know there were some very important questions around O&M as well. My 3 key takeaways, I think, based on the learnings that really came out, I mean, apart from what was said in the previous panel, is I think the need for distributed, decentralized. I like the fact that the future clean energy systems needs to be locally procured, locally owned. I think that is really a disruptive way of thinking about it. We need future clean energy systems will embrace risk and think about it from a systems lens, and hopefully be collaborative and move towards stronger impact faster. Thank you so much. Thank you all. We have a round of applause for the panelists. Yeah.